So who fixed all 9 of these jets? Audrey Harrington asked, her voice carrying across the freezing hangar like an order that expected no delay. In front of her stood a fleet that had just passed an emergency inspection, the same 9 aircraft that 45 federal and third-party inspectors had marked beyond repair only 6 days earlier. Behind her waited billionaire Sterling Blackwell, his pen already warming in his pocket before his lawyer expected a signature. No one answered right away. The pilots looked at the concrete, the technicians looked at each other. Then Ethan Pike, the senior captain, slowly raised his hand toward the hangar door. "The man you just fired, ma'am." Audrey turned, and there was Noah Whitlock walking out in silence. If you're watching this from your kitchen table, your car before a shift, or your bed at the end of a long day, we're glad you're here. Stories like this one remind us that the people who quietly hold everything together are rarely the ones anyone thinks to thank. Stay with us to the end of this one. It's worth it. It was 6:52 in the morning at Hangar 3, Harrington Meridian Air, Boone County Regional Airfield, Kentucky. The contract on the folding table behind Audrey was worth $340 million less than the board had asked for it, and Sterling Blackwell had 11 minutes left before his lawyer expected a signature. Noah's tool bag was already over his shoulder. In the inside pocket of his jacket was a spiral notebook, corners worn soft from 11 months of handling. And inside that notebook was a name that had never once appeared on a single official Harrington Meridian repair record. Noah did not turn around. He pushed the personnel door open and stepped into the cold. Behind him, 9 jets sat in perfect rows under the hangar lights, and not one person in that building could yet explain how they got that way. But to understand how everything changed, we need to go back. Noah Whitlock was 40 years old, and for 2 years he had worked the night shift at Harrington Meridian Air by choice, not by circumstance. He had once been an engine certification engineer at a major carrier out of Nashville, a job that paid nearly double what he made now, with a corner office waiting for him if he stayed another 5 years. He left it without a severance fight and without regret, because his wife had died and his daughter Clara was 6 years old and needed a parent who could be home when the school bus pulled up. The night shift solved that problem. Nobody else wanted the hours between midnight and 7 in the morning, which meant nobody was watching too closely what Noah did with them, and it meant his mornings and afternoons belonged entirely to Clara. He made her breakfast, he walked her to the bus stop, he sat at the kitchen table in the small house at the edge of the old airfield and helped her with homework before he slept a few hours and did it all again. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a compass, was a drawing Clara had made 2 years earlier, a stick figure standing under an airplane, and beneath it, in a 9-year-old's careful crayon print, "My dad fixes the sky." He never told people at work about the engineering job he had walked away from. Nobody at Harrington Meridian asked. To most of the day shift, Noah was just the quiet man who showed up after dark, did his work, and left before the office people arrived. Graham Hollis referred to him once in a meeting as one of the older mechanics, not unkindly, but not accurately either. Noah had forgotten more about aircraft systems than most of the day shift had learned. He never corrected anyone. He never mentioned the notebook he kept in his jacket, or the fact that he could listen to an engine for 4 seconds and tell you which bearing was wearing down before any diagnostic panel caught it. He asked for one thing from the company every time a fault came across his bench, that no aircraft be pushed into the air before it was actually ready. It cost the company nothing but patience. For 6 months, as Harrington Meridian's finances collapsed inward, patience was the one thing Graham Hollis had stopped being willing to spend. It started with a sound. 3 weeks before the inspection, Noah was running a routine post-flight check on tail number N448HM when he heard it. A faint, irregular pulse in the number 2 auxiliary power unit, audible only if you had your ear close to the access panel and the hangar was otherwise silent. It lasted less than a second, then vanished. Most mechanics would have logged it as within tolerance and moved on. Noah did not move on. He pulled the maintenance history on N448HM and found nothing unusual. He ran the diagnostic suite twice. Both times it came back clean.
But the sound had been real, and Noah had spent 20 years learning that a sound that shows up once and hides itself afterward is usually the most dangerous kind, because it means the failure is intermittent, and intermittent failures are the ones that pass every test right up until the moment they don't. He wrote it up, not as an emergency because he had no proof of one yet, but as a recommendation for deeper inspection before the aircraft's next heavy rotation. He sent it up through the internal reporting system the way he always did, with a tracking number and a timestamp. 3 days later, the same recommendation came back marked resolved, no fault found, signed off by a name that wasn't his. Noah checked the aircraft himself that night. Nothing had been touched. He mentioned it to Ethan Pike the next time the captain came through for a pre-flight walk-around. Ethan listened, frowned, and said the paperwork upstairs had been calling the whole fleet fine for months now, cleaner than he'd ever seen it look on paper. Both men found that strange because neither of their daily experience matched it. Ethan was writing up more minor faults in the cockpit than he had in years. Noah was fixing more of them off the clock than any report ever credited him for. Noah raised it once with Graham Hollins directly in the hallway outside the operations office, keeping his voice level the way he kept everything level. He said the system seemed to be closing things out before they were actually checked. Graham told him the system was fine, that Noah should focus on his own bench and let operations handle operations. It was said pleasantly enough. It was also the 4th time in 2 months Graham had ended a similar conversation the exact same way. Noah went back to the hangar floor. He opened his notebook, wrote the date, and started a new page. By the following week, the fault reports Noah filed had developed a pattern he could no longer ignore, and neither, quietly, could Ethan Pike. Every write-up that touched the auxiliary power units or the brake assemblies on the older aircraft came back closed within 48 hours, always marked no fault found, always signed by a technician name Noah didn't recognize from any shift roster. He asked around. Nobody on the floor had heard of a mechanic by that name. The signature existed only on paper. Graham Hollins, in the meantime, had started appearing in the hangar during the day shift more often than he ever had before, walking the aircraft alongside visiting consultants from Blackwell Crown Capital, speaking with the calm confidence of a man reciting numbers he was certain of. He told the consultants the fleet's auxiliary power units had been fully overhauled that quarter. He told them brake wear across the older jets was well within manufacturer limits. He said it in front of Audrey Harrington more than once, and Audrey wrote it down without asking to see the underlying work orders. Harold Vance, the outside auditor Blackwell Crown Capital had hired to review the books ahead of the emergency inspection, found nothing alarming. The numbers were consistent. The signatures matched company format. On paper, Harrington Meridian's fleet looked like one of the healthiest he'd reviewed that year. Noah kept fixing what the reports said didn't need fixing. He replaced a chafed wiring harness on N448HM at 2 in the morning, off any work order, and wrote it in his own notebook instead of the company system, because the company system had stopped reflecting reality weeks earlier. Nobody asked where the part came from. Nobody asked why the aircraft that was supposedly fine kept needing him at all.
The pattern finally connected on a Tuesday night, 4 days before the emergency inspection. Noah was cross-referencing part requisition numbers against the closed-out fault reports, a habit he'd kept since his engineering days, when he noticed something that didn't add up. The system showed dozens of parts marked as installed and paid for, brake assemblies, wiring harnesses, sensor units, but the physical inventory in the parts cage didn't match. The parts existed on paper, they didn't exist on the shelf. He pulled the requisition records back 6 months and found the same gap repeating itself aircraft after aircraft. Parts ordered, parts invoiced, parts never received. Somewhere between the purchase order and the hangar floor, money was leaving the company and nothing was coming back in return. Noah did not assume theft right away. He considered shipping errors, warehouse mistakes, ordinary bureaucratic sloppiness. He spent 2 more nights checking supplier confirmations against delivery logs before he ruled all of that out. The suppliers had shipped everything on time. The delivery logs at the airfield showed signatures for receipt, but the actual physical count in the cage never grew. He found the same mechanic name again, the one that didn't belong to anyone on the roster, co-signed on 11 of the requisition forms. He did not go to Graham Hollis with it. He had gone to Graham 4 times already about the fault reports and gotten nowhere. Instead, he wrote it all into his notebook, page after page, dates and numbers and part codes, and he began quietly photographing what he could without drawing attention. A cracked bracket here, a corroded fitting there. The real condition of aircraft the paperwork insisted were sound. He understood, without yet being able to prove who was responsible, that the gap between what the reports said and what the hangar floor showed was not an accident. Someone was paying for repairs that were never done, and someone else was signing off as if they had been. The 9 aircraft the company was about to present to 45 outside inspectors were not fine. They were a fleet built on invoices instead of wrenches, and the inspection was 4 days away. 4 days became 2. With the outside inspection now set for Thursday morning, Graham Hollis grew visibly anxious in a way Noah had not seen him before. Twice that week he walked the hangar floor late, alone, checking the tail numbers against a printed list, as if counting on the aircraft to hold together through sheer repetition of his own confidence. On Wednesday night, Noah made his decision. He could not fix 11 months of falsified requisitions in 48 hours, and he could not prove who had taken the money without help he didn't yet have. But he could make sure that whatever 45 inspectors found on Thursday morning, it would be the truth and not a lie built on top of another lie. He worked through the night and through the next one after it, sleeping in 2-hour stretches on a cot in the break room instead of driving home. He replaced the chafed wiring harness on N448HM properly, with parts pulled from a supplier he called personally rather than trusting the requisition system. He retorqued brake assemblies on 3 other aircraft that the false reports had marked as recently serviced, but that his own hands told him had not been touched in months. He tracked down the source of the intermittent auxiliary power unit fault on 2 more jets and corrected it at the component level, not just the symptom. He logged every hour of it in his notebook with photographs, timestamps, and the serial numbers of the real parts he had installed, because he understood by now that the company's own system could not be trusted to remember what he had done. By Thursday morning, 9 aircraft that 45 inspectors would soon walk through stood in the hangar in a condition that matched their paperwork for the first time in months, not because the paperwork had been corrected, but because Noah had spent 2 sleepless nights making the aircraft catch up to a lie. He clipped his badge to his jacket, put his notebook in his pocket, and waited for the inspection to begin, not knowing yet that within a few hours, a disagreement over a single fuel pressure sensor would cost him the job he had just stayed awake 2 nights straight to protect.
The notebook changed everything the moment Harold Vance read it in full. Ethan Pike had brought Noah back to a small technical office off the hangar floor that same afternoon, recorder running, an independent safety officer named Diane Alcott seated at the end of the table. Noah slid the notebook across, opened to the pages on the parts requisitions, and let the numbers speak before he said anything himself. Vance went quiet, the way he had gone quiet in the hangar that morning, only this time it lasted much longer. He cross-checked 3 of the requisition numbers against the official books Blackwell Crown Capital had already reviewed, and found that the same gap Noah had documented independently matched, dollar for dollar, a set of consulting payments Graham Hollis had received over the past 11 months from a firm called Ridgeline Partners. Ridgeline Partners, according to public filings Daphne Monroe pulled that same evening, was a shell company registered to an address that traced back to Sterling Blackwell. The shape of it became clear within hours. Graham had been ordering parts, invoicing the company for repairs that were never fully completed, and quietly diverting a portion of the difference through Ridgeline Partners back to himself and, indirectly, to the very buyer waiting to acquire the airline at a discount. The fleet's true condition had been deteriorating for months, while the official reports insisted otherwise. And the deterioration itself was the leverage. Once Audrey signed the sale, the post-closing adjustment clause Daphne had flagged earlier would let Blackwell Crown Capital slash the purchase price the moment any of those hidden defects surfaced, defects Graham had been paid, in part, to help create. It was not simply a story of a mechanic overworked and underappreciated. It was a fraud built in layers, each one hidden inside the one above it. Noah's firing that morning had not been an unfortunate misunderstanding. It had been, whether Audrey realized it at the time or not, the removal of the one person in the building capable of noticing that the numbers and the metal no longer agreed. Audrey sat with this in silence longer than anyone in the room expected. She had walked into the hangar that morning believing she was one signature away from saving her family's company. She was beginning to understand she had been one signature away from handing it to the man who had spent 11 months quietly breaking it. Audrey called the emergency board meeting for that same evening in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the hangar floor, where the 9 jets still sat under the lamps. Victor Harrington attended by video from New York, already pressing his daughter to protect the family name before she had said a word about what she'd found. Sterling Blackwell arrived in person, unhurried, still believing the numbers in his favor. Graham Hollis sat near the end of the table, binder in front of him, the same binder he had always used as a shield. Audrey did not open with an accusation. She opened by putting Noah's notebook on the screen, page by page, the 11 months of requisitions beside the 11 months of consulting payments to Ridgeline Partners. She let Harold Vamps confirm the dollar figures out loud, and let Daphne Monroe confirm the shell company's ownership out loud, so that no one in the room could later claim the numbers were misread. Ethan Pike spoke next, describing the fault reports pilots had filed for months that had gone nowhere. Then Diane Alcott, the independent safety officer, stated for the record that in her professional judgment, at least 4 of the 9 aircraft would not have passed inspection Thursday morning without the unlogged repair work Noah had performed in the 2 nights before it. Graham tried once more to reframe it, calling Noah a disgruntled employee inventing a conspiracy out of spite. Nobody in the room believed him this time, least of all Sterling Blackwell, who understood before anyone said it plainly that his own name was now attached to Ridgeline Partners in a filed document.
Audrey stood. She looked at her father's face on the screen, at Sterling across the table, at Graham beside him, and then out through the glass at the 9 aircraft sitting in their rows. "The Blackwell deal is suspended," she said. "Graham Hollis is suspended pending investigation, and Noah Whitlock will lead an independent safety review of every aircraft in this fleet." No one clapped, no one cheered. It was not that kind of room. But for the first time in 11 months, every number on every screen in that office matched the truth sitting on the hangar floor below it, and everyone present understood exactly whose hands had made that possible. The weeks after the board meeting were not easy ones. Suspending the Blackwell deal threw the company into a kind of scrutiny it hadn't faced in years. Reporters called asking why a $340 million acquisition had collapsed overnight. 2 board members sided with Victor, arguing that Audrey had let a night mechanic's grievance derail a rescue the company still badly needed. She did not have a clean answer for all of it. She only had the notebook, the requisition numbers, and a fleet that, for the first time in nearly a year, matched its own paperwork. Graham Hollis was formally investigated for fraud and for the payments tied to Ridgeline Partners. His case moved slowly through the courts, but his career at Harrington Meridian ended the night the board saw the numbers on the screen. Sterling Blackwell's firm withdrew from the deal within the month, and the airfield land he had quietly wanted stayed where it had always been, under the name that had built it. Audrey spent more time on the hangar floor than any Harrington CEO before her. She learned the names of the technicians she had known only as line items on a payroll.
She restored the maintenance budget Graham had gutted, and she separated the safety reporting system from any manager with a financial stake in the outcome, exactly as Noah had once asked for and never received. Noah was reinstated, and the company created a new position for him, Director of Flight Safety Operations, a role with no one above it who could bury a report again. He accepted it, though he made clear he had never done any of it for a title. He still drove home most nights to the small house at the edge of the old airfield, still made breakfast for Clara, still kept a drawing on the refrigerator exactly where it had always been. On the morning the first aircraft flew out under the new safety procedures, Audrey stood beside him on the tarmac and asked why he'd kept his old employee badge, the one he'd set down the day she fired him, clipped next to his new one. He looked at it for a moment before answering. "So the company remembers," he said, "that it almost lost the one thing it never should have questioned." The jet climbed clean into the Kentucky sky. Nobody in the hangar asked who had fixed it. By then, everyone already knew.